So we're going to go into our third question, accountability. And up first, we have Melissa, we'll transition to Jen, and then lastly, we'll have Sherry. If you are elected to the school committee, what actions will you take to hold Melrose Public Schools accountable for incidents and patterns of systematic racism?
Systemic racism is an ongoing challenge that requires consistent attention, reflection, and action. We know that Black and Brown students in Melrose have experienced harm and exclusion, and we must be committed to doing better. If elected to the school committee, I will, one, ensure equity is a priority in our leadership hiring. When we're selecting a superintendent, we can ask direct questions about their experiences and trainings around anti-racism work. We can ask about their goals to working toward removing systemic racism and how they have planned to accomplish this within the district. We can review our policies and our handbooks through an equity lens. This includes, but is not limited to, our disciplinary procedures. We want to ensure that our policies are fair and do not disproportionately impact any marginalized students. Three, I support restorative justice practices, which are currently listed as one of the discipline practices in our student handbooks. We need to continue to evaluate that these procedures are being implemented consistently and effectively. We can advocate for and support programs like We the People, as I mentioned, in our schools to begin racial literacy in elementary school and build upon these learning opportunities through things like racial studies classes and or student groups that focus on racial discussions. And we can offer staff training and coaching to provide ongoing support for teachers to be able to handle situations with compassion and care. This includes anti-bias training, cultural competency, and trauma-informed practices. And we can advocate for and support teachers who are providing curriculum that is inclusive and holistic. I do want to be clear that I understand that some of these points will cost money and that we don't currently have that this is not currently available in our budget. Our budget constraints are real, but we can consider ways in which we can still act with low cost initiatives, and then we can build towards our larger goals as funding becomes available, because we need to be in a school system that invests in these practices for all of our students. I'm committed to keeping these conversations active and centered on the well-being of our students.
And up next, Jen.
Thank you. So one of the things that's tricky about being on a school committee is you don't always see what we do behind the scenes because we cannot be part of personnel decisions. That's not within our purview. The only person that we hire and evaluate is a superintendent, and we can approve new positions. We do that based on job descriptions, but we are not responsible for day-to-day operations within schools. That being said, that doesn't mean that we don't put pressure on the system, and we always hold the superintendent to a very high standard. So I think, the superintendent is accountable for the staffing, and I think so. But we can know that if there's patterns of systemic racism regarding discipline, there's lots of things we can do about that in terms of policy, and we can do a lot through hiring good people. I know we're going to get to representation among teaching staff in the next question, but I just think it's really important for us to remember what the role of the school committee is. It's also important for us to be outspoken about diversity, equity, and inclusion, about being anti-racist, and to continue to say those words right now when they're under assault by our federal government. So I think being really confident about that, also not allowing, people to silence us who want to silence us. So we've seen some actions in other cities and towns around us. Peabody, for instance, recently they tried to get rid of All American Boys as a piece of literature, and the public school union spoke up against that, and there was a pretty heated school committee meeting about that. So if that is about to happen here in Melrose, which I don't think it will, we're ready for it because we instituted a new policy last year or earlier this year around what to do when we have complaints about what people may consider inappropriate books or curriculum. So we're ready to say, no, we're going to protect free speech and we're not going to erase any history. And you have that pledge from me right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Sherry?
Okay. I'm excited to also dig into some of the policies that we're going to talk about in the next questions, but I will try to keep it brief and focus just on this accountability question here right now. And I want to start off by naming that topics of racism and bias are complex and emotionally charged. And so I have seen throughout my career, it's tempting to sidestep the conversations. I also believe deeply that it's critically important that if we are to live into our motto of Melrose, one community open to all, then we cannot shy away from what is uncomfortable or inconvenient. It's also worth noting that systemic racism is about just that, systems and institutions. Systemic racism transcends generations and the boundaries of our city, which isn't to say the problem is too hard or too complicated or out of our hands. We can and must address bias in policies and systems that we manage and we own. As a school committee member, I pledge to listen deeply, remain alert to patterns of bias and disparate outcomes, and lift up what I find. Accountability isn't a one-time action, but an ongoing conversation about intentions, impact, data, and experiences. When we identify harm, we need to step up, acknowledge it, apologize, and work for change. That's what accountability looks like in this and all areas of school committee leadership. And I'm excited to engage with other school committee members in this area.
Thank you so much for taking the time to answer those questions.